The stage was set and the air buzzed with anticipation. The bright studio lights illuminated every corner of the room, casting sharp shadows on the sleek desks where 2 microphones stood ready. Behind the scenes, Karoline Leavitt took a deep breath as she adjusted her blazer in front of the mirror. Known for her razor-sharp intellect and calm demeanor, she had prepared tirelessly for this moment. Tonight's debate promised to be unlike anything she'd done before. Her opponent? None other than Jasmine Crockett, a fiery and outspoken personality who thrived in high-stakes verbal battles. Karoline glanced at the clock mounted on the wall. It was almost time. She could hear the murmur of the audience growing louder outside. The green room door. People were filing into their seats, chatting excitedly about what they might witness tonight. This wasn't just another debate. It was a clash of titans. Both women represented opposing sides of a deeply divisive issue that had dominated headlines for weeks. For some, it felt like the entire nation was holding its breath, waiting to see who would emerge victorious. Jasmine arrived moments later, striding confidently down the hallway with an entourage trailing behind her. Her bold red suit made a statement, much like everything else about her presence. She exuded confidence, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor as she moved toward the makeup chair. Unlike Karoline, who preferred quiet reflection, before stepping onto the stage, Jasmine seemed to thrive on the energy of the crowd. She laughed loudly while sharing anecdotes with her team, clearly relishing the spotlight. As the countdown began, both women were escorted to their respective seats. The moderator greeted them warmly but kept his tone professional, reminding them of the ground rules for the evening. "This is a platform for thoughtful discussion," he emphasized, though everyone knew that civility often gave way to passion during debates like these. Cameras lined the edges of the stage, capturing every angle, ensuring nothing would escape the public eye. The tension between Karoline and Jasmine was already evident. Neither woman offered more than a polite nod when introduced to the other. The audience settled into their seats, buzzing with excitement. Some leaned forward eagerly, clutching notebooks or smartphones to jot down key points. Others whispered predictions to their neighbors, speculating how long it would take for things to heat up. A few clapped politely as the host welcomed viewers, tuning in from home, reminding them to stay engaged using hashtags displayed across the bottom of the screen. Social media had become a battleground of its own, and tonight's event was sure to dominate timelines worldwide. Backstage, the production crew worked quietly but efficiently, double-checking equipment and running final checks. Everything had to go smoothly. There was no room for error. One missed cue or malfunctioning microphone could derail the entire show. Meanwhile, the director peered through the glass window overlooking the set, giving last-minute instructions to camera operators. He pointed out specific shots to capture, close-ups of facial expressions, wide angles showing body language, reaction shots from the audience. Every detail mattered. For Karoline, the seconds ticked by excruciatingly slowly. She clasped her hands together under the desk, willing herself to stay focused. Though outwardly composed, her mind raced with possibilities. What opening argument should she lead with? How aggressive would Jasmine be? Could she maintain her composure if provoked? These questions swirled in her head, but she pushed them aside, reminding herself why she was here. This wasn't about personal glory. It was about presenting facts, sparking meaningful dialogue, and standing firm in her beliefs. Jasmine, on the other hand, appeared unfazed. She flipped through her notes casually, occasionally glancing up, to flash a confident smile at the cameras. To anyone watching, she seemed completely at ease, as if she owned the stage. But beneath the surface, she too was strategizing. She knew Karoline's reputation for being quick-witted and well-prepared. That meant she couldn't afford to let her guard down, even for a second. If anything, Jasmine planned to dominate the conversation early, setting the tone and leaving little room for her opponent to maneuver. Finally, the moment arrived. The theme music played, and the host stepped up to introduce the program. His voice boomed through the speakers, commanding attention. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's special edition of Live Debate," he announced, earning enthusiastic applause from the audience. Our topic tonight is one of the most pressing issues facing our society today, and we have two incredible guests joining us to share their perspectives. He turned first to Jasmine, gesturing grandly as he introduced her. On my left, we have Jasmine Crockett, a passionate advocate, seasoned commentator, and fearless voice in the national discourse. The audience erupted into cheers, many rising to their feet to applaud. Jasmine acknowledged the response with a gracious wave, basking in the adoration. Then the host turned to Karoline. And on my right, we have Karoline Leavitt, a brilliant journalist and emerging leader in the field of investigative reporting. Though quieter than the reception Jasmine received, the applause for Karoline was steady and respectful, reflecting admiration for her work. With formalities out of the way, the host launched into a brief overview of the topic. He explained the stakes, highlighting why this debate mattered so much to people across the country. As he spoke, Karoline stole a glance at Jasmine. There was something almost predatory in the way her opponent carried herself, as if she were sizing up her prey. It sent a shiver down Karoline's spine, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she squared her shoulders, reminding herself that preparation and poise would be her greatest allies. When the host finished speaking, he turned to Jasmine, inviting her to make the first opening statement. The audience leaned in, eager to hear what she had to say. Without hesitation, Jasmine launched into a powerful monologue, her words dripping with conviction. She painted vivid pictures with her rhetoric, appealing to emotions as much as logic. Her delivery was flawless, designed to captivate and persuade. By the time she paused for breath, the audience was hanging on her every word. But Karoline wasn't fazed. She had listened intently, analyzing each point Jasmine made. When it was her turn to speak, she leaned slightly forward, making direct eye contact with the camera. Her voice rang clear and steady, cutting through the lingering echoes of Jasmine's speech. "Thank you," she began, her tone measured but firm. "I appreciate the passion my colleague brings to this discussion. However, I believe there are critical facts we must also consider." And with that, she laid the foundation for her argument, setting the stage for what would become an unforgettable showdown. The atmosphere in the studio shifted subtly. The audience sensed that this wasn't going to be a typical back-and-forth exchange. Something bigger was brewing, and no one wanted to miss a single moment. As Jasmine wrapped up her opening statement, the audience erupted into applause. Her words had been fiery and dramatic, delivered with such conviction that it was hard not to feel moved. She leaned back in her chair, a satisfied smile playing on her lips as she glanced at Karoline. It was clear she believed she'd set the tone for the evening, a tone of dominance, of unshakable authority. But Karoline didn't flinch. Instead, she sat perfectly still, her hands resting lightly on the desk in front of her. Her expression was calm, almost serene, as if she were observing something fascinating rather than participating in a high-stakes debate. When it was finally Karoline's turn to speak, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to her, waiting to see how she would respond to Jasmine's powerful performance. Karoline took a deep breath, then began speaking in a voice so steady and clear that it commanded immediate attention. "Thank you," she said, nodding politely toward Jasmine before turning her gaze to the audience. "I appreciate the passion my colleague brings to this discussion. Passion is important. It keeps us engaged. It drives change. But passion alone isn't enough. We need facts, we need evidence, and we need solutions." Her opening line struck a chord. The audience leaned forward slightly, intrigued by the contrast between her measured delivery and Jasmine's earlier theatrics. Karoline continued, laying out her argument point by point. She spoke about statistics, studies, and real-world examples, weaving them together into a narrative that was both compelling and easy to follow. Her words weren't flashy or overly emotional, but they carried weight. Every sentence felt deliberate, every fact meticulously chosen to support her position. Jasmine watched her closely, her brow furrowing ever so slightly. She hadn't expected Karoline to be quite this composed, or this precise. When Karoline paused briefly to glance at her notes, Jasmine seized the opportunity. "Hold on just a second," she interjected, raising a hand as if to physically stop Karoline mid-sentence. "You're cherry-picking data here. What about the bigger picture? You can't ignore context," the audience murmured in agreement. It was a bold move, interrupting someone who was clearly building momentum. But Jasmine wasn't one to sit idly by while her opponent gained ground. She leaned forward, her voice rising as she pressed her point. "Let's talk about the human element. Numbers are great, sure, but what about the people affected by these policies? Don't they deserve a voice too?" Karoline blinked once, slowly, as though processing the interruption. Then, without missing a beat, she responded. "Absolutely," she said, her tone unwavering. "People matter, of course they do. But making decisions based solely on emotion without considering the data can lead to unintended consequences. That's why we have to strike a balance." She looked directly at Jasmine as she spoke, her eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made even the most seasoned viewers sit up straighter. For a moment, there was silence. The audience seemed unsure of whom to side with. On one hand, Jasmine's appeal to emotion resonated deeply. It tapped into something primal, something visceral. On the other hand, Karoline's logic was undeniable. Her arguments were grounded, methodical, and impossible to dismiss outright. The tension in the room grew thicker, almost palpable as both women prepared to dig deeper. But Jasmine wasn't done yet. Sensing that she needed to regain control of the conversation, she doubled down. "Look," she said, her voice sharp, and pointed. "You can throw all the numbers you want at me, but at the end of the day, policy isn't made in a vacuum. Real lives are at stake here. Families, communities. Are you telling me those don't count for anything?" Before Karoline could respond, Jasmine cut her off again. "And let's not forget, your so-called facts often come from biased sources. How can we trust them when they're funded by organizations with their own agendas?" She punctuated her question with a sweeping gesture, as if dismissing everything Karoline had said thus far. This time, the audience reacted more strongly. Some nodded in agreement, clearly swayed by Jasmine's argument. Others frowned, sensing that she might be overplaying her hand. Interrupting twice in such quick succession felt less like a strategic move and more like an attempt to bulldoze her opponent into submission. Even the moderator shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing at the clock as if wondering whether he should step in. Karoline, however, remained unfazed. She waited patiently until Jasmine finished, her expression neutral but alert. When the opportunity came, she leaned forward slightly, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Let me finish," she said firmly, her words landing with surprising force. For a split second, Jasmine hesitated, caught off guard by the steel in Karoline's tone. No one had spoken to her like that on live television before, not with such quiet authority. "I'm glad you brought up the issue of bias," Karoline continued, her voice softening just enough to draw the audience back in, "because it's a valid concern. But if we're going to critique sources, we need to apply the same scrutiny to all sides, not just the ones that disagree with us." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. "And as for families and communities, of course they matter. But making decisions without understanding the full scope of the problem doesn't help anyone. In fact, it can make things worse." The audience stirred, some nodding thoughtfully while others whispered to their neighbors. Karoline's rebuttal had been masterful, a perfect blend of empathy and logic. She hadn't denied the importance of emotion. Instead, she had reframed it within the context of her argument. By doing so, she managed to neutralize Jasmine's attack while reinforcing her own position. Jasmine, meanwhile, was visibly struggling to regroup. She opened her mouth to interject again, but Karoline held up a single hand, palm facing outward. It was a subtle gesture, almost imperceptible, but it stopped Jasmine in her tracks. "I'm still speaking," Karoline said evenly, her voice carrying a quiet authority that silenced any further attempts at interruption. For the first time since the debate began, Jasmine found herself at a loss for words. The shift in dynamics was unmistakable. Where Jasmine had once dominated the conversation with her fiery rhetoric, Karoline now held the reins. Her calm demeanor, and razor-sharp intellect had turned the tables, leaving her opponent scrambling to keep up. The audience could feel it too. The energy in the room had changed. What had started as a lopsided battle of personalities was now evolving into something far more complex and intriguing. As Karoline wrapped up her response, the moderator stepped in to guide the conversation back on track. "Ladies, thank you both for your insights," he said diplomatically, though his tone suggested he was aware of the growing tension. "Let's move on to our next topic, shall we?" Behind the scenes, the production crew exchanged knowing glances. They had seen countless debates unfold, but this one felt different. There was an electricity in the air, a sense that history was being made right before their eyes. Social media feeds were already lighting up with reactions, clips of the exchange spreading like wildfire. Viewers at home were glued to their screens, debating which woman had the upper hand. Back on stage, Jasmine adjusted her posture, trying to reclaim some of her earlier confidence. But the damage had been done. Karoline's composure and precision had exposed cracks in her armor, forcing her to rethink her strategy on the fly. For Karoline, the moment was a testament to the power of preparation and poise. She hadn't set out to dominate the conversation, but in staying true to her principles, she had achieved exactly that. The debate was far from over, but one thing was certain: the audience wouldn't soon forget what they had just witnessed. As the debate moved into its next phase, the moderator posed a new question, this time one that required both women to address the long-term implications of their respective positions. The topic was complex, involving economic forecasts, social dynamics, and ethical considerations. It was the kind of question that could easily overwhelm even the most seasoned debaters. But Karoline Leavitt didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her posture relaxed yet focused, as if she were about to explain something fascinating rather than argue a contentious point. Jasmine, however, seemed less at ease. She glanced down at her notes briefly, her fingers tapping nervously on the desk. Her earlier confidence appeared to have dimmed, replaced by a cautious wariness. Karoline's ability to dismantle arguments with precision and poise had clearly rattled her. Still, Jasmine wasn't one to back down without a fight. As soon as the moderator finished speaking, she jumped in, determined to reassert herself. "Let's be real here," Jasmine began, her voice regaining some of its earlier fire. "The policies we're talking about today aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They affect real people. Families who are struggling to put food on the table, kids who don't know if they'll have a roof over their heads tomorrow. You can't boil that down to charts and graphs." She gestured emphatically, her words dripping with emotion. "We need action, not analysis paralysis." The audience murmured in agreement. Jasmine's appeal to human suffering resonated deeply, tugging at heartstrings and reminding everyone of the stakes involved. For a moment, it seemed like she might regain control of the narrative. But then Karoline spoke, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the emotional fog Jasmine had created. "I completely agree," Karoline said, nodding thoughtfully. "These issues do affect real people, and that's precisely why we need to approach them carefully. Rushing into decisions without fully understanding the consequences doesn't help anyone. In fact, it often makes things worse." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "Take, for example, the case study I mentioned earlier. When similar policies were implemented in another state, unemployment rates actually increased because businesses couldn't adapt quickly enough. Good intentions aren't enough. We need solutions that work." Her response was devastatingly effective. By agreeing with Jasmine's premise that these issues mattered deeply to real people, she diffused the emotional charge of the argument. At the same time, she used hard evidence to highlight the risks of hasty decision-making. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the weight of her logic. Even Jasmine looked momentarily taken aback, as though she hadn't anticipated such a measured counter-argument. But Jasmine wasn't ready to concede. She rallied quickly, leaning forward with renewed intensity. "That's all well and good," she shot back, her tone sharpening. "But waiting around for perfect solutions isn't an option either. People are suffering right now, not next year. Not 5 years from now. We can't afford to delay. It was a clever pivot, framing Karoline's emphasis on caution as indifference or inaction. Some members of the audience nodded approvingly, clearly swayed by the implication that Karoline lacked urgency. Jasmine pressed her advantage, raising her voice slightly as she drove home her point. If we wait until every I is dotted and every T is crossed, nothing will ever get done. Sometimes you have to take a leap of faith. Karoline listened intently, her expression unreadable. When Jasmine finally paused for breath, Karoline responded with characteristic composure. A leap of faith is admirable, she acknowledged, her tone respectful but firm. But leaping blindly, that's reckless. And when it comes to policies that impact millions of lives, recklessness isn't leadership, it's negligence. The room fell silent. Karoline's words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. She went on to elaborate, citing specific examples, where poorly planned initiatives had led to unintended consequences. Each example was delivered with clarity and precision, leaving no room for misinterpretation. By the time she finished, the audience was visibly torn. On one side, there was Jasmine's passionate plea for immediate action. On the other, Karoline's sobering reminder of the dangers of haste. Sensing that she needed to change tactics, Jasmine tried a different approach. You talk about data and studies, she said, her voice tinged with frustration. But what happens when those studies contradict each other? What happens when experts disagree? Do we just throw up our hands and do nothing? It was a valid question, one that many viewers were likely asking themselves. But Karoline was prepared. Disagreement among experts is inevitable, she replied smoothly. That's why transparency is so important. We need to present the full range of evidence, warts and all, so people can make informed decisions. Pretending there's only one right answer, or ignoring inconvenient truths, isn't helpful. Her response drew murmurs of approval from parts of the audience. While Jasmine's arguments appealed to emotion, Karoline's emphasis on transparency and accountability struck a chord with those who valued pragmatism over rhetoric. The contrast between the two women was becoming increasingly stark. Jasmine's fiery passion versus Karoline's cool intellect, emotion versus reason, instinct versus evidence. The turning point came when the moderator posed a direct question to Jasmine about a controversial statement she had made during a previous interview. The statement had sparked widespread criticism online, and the moderator clearly wanted to see how she would defend it under pressure. Jasmine hesitated, caught off guard by the sudden shift in focus. She glanced at her notes again, searching for a lifeline, but found none. Karoline, sensing an opportunity, waited patiently for Jasmine to respond. When the silence stretched too long, she interjected gently but firmly. "Would you like me to clarify my position while you gather your thoughts?" she asked, her tone polite but laced with subtle irony. The audience chuckled nervously, sensing the power dynamic shifting further in Karoline's favor. Jasmine bristled but managed to stammer out a response. "I stand by what I said," she declared, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. "Context matters, and I think people are deliberately misinterpreting my words to score political points." Karoline nodded, appearing sympathetic. "Fair enough," she said, "but context cuts both ways. If we're going to critique others for taking statements out of context, we also need to hold ourselves accountable for clarity and consistency." She turned to the audience, her gaze steady and sincere. At the end of the day, trust is earned through honesty and transparency. Anything less undermines the very foundation of meaningful dialogue. The audience erupted into applause, unable to contain their admiration for Karoline's eloquence and fairness. Even Jasmine seemed momentarily stunned, her usual bravado giving way to uncertainty. For the first time in the debate, she appeared unsure of how to proceed. Her attempts to interrupt or dominate the conversation had been met with calm resistance, and her efforts to steer the discussion toward emotional appeals had been skillfully countered with logic and evidence. Behind the scenes, the production crew exchanged awestruck glances. They had witnessed countless debates, but this one felt extraordinary. Karoline's ability to remain composed under pressure, and to use that composure as a weapon, was unlike anything they'd seen before. Meanwhile, social media feeds exploded with reactions as clips of the exchange went viral almost instantly. Viewers debated whether Jasmine's passion outweighed Karoline's precision or vice versa, but one thing was clear. The tide had turned decisively in Karoline's favor. The segment neared its conclusion. The moderator stepped in to wrap up the discussion. "Thank you both for your insights," he said diplomatically, though his tone suggested he knew which debater had seized the upper hand. "We'll return after this short break." Backstage, reporters buzzed with excitement, eager to capture soundbites from both women. Karoline remained composed, graciously accepting compliments while deflecting praise onto the importance of open dialogue. Jasmine, meanwhile, retreated quietly, avoiding eye contact as she processed what had just happened. The debate wasn't over yet, but the momentum had shifted irreversibly, and everyone watching knew it. The debate resumed after the commercial break, and the atmosphere in the studio had shifted noticeably. The audience was buzzing with anticipation, their earlier excitement now tinged with curiosity about how Jasmine Crockett would recover from the mounting pressure. Karoline Leavitt, on the other hand, seemed to have settled into a rhythm, her confidence growing with each passing moment. She sat upright in her chair, hands resting lightly on the desk, her posture exuding calm assurance. Her eyes were sharp, focused not just on Jasmine but also on the moderator, ready to respond to whatever came next. Jasmine, however, appeared less composed. For someone known for dominating debates, she now seemed hesitant, almost unsure of herself. Her usual fiery demeanor had dimmed, replaced by a guarded expression that hinted at frustration. As the moderator introduced the next topic, a question about accountability and responsibility, Jasmine leaned forward slightly as if bracing herself for another round. But instead of jumping in immediately, she hesitated, glancing down at her notes more than once. It was an uncharacteristic move, and the audience noticed. When the moderator turned to Jasmine first, she took a deep breath before responding. "Accountability is critical," she began, her voice steady but lacking its earlier fervor. "But let's not forget who we're really holding accountable here. Too often, these conversations shift blame onto the wrong people, the ones least equipped to handle it." She gestured emphatically, trying to inject some energy into her argument. "We need to focus on systemic issues, not scapegoats." Her response was solid enough, but it lacked the punch that had defined her earlier statements. The audience nodded politely, though their enthusiasm felt muted compared to before. Sensing this, Jasmine pushed harder, raising her voice slightly as she elaborated. "And let's talk about leadership. Real leaders don't wait around for permission, they step up and take action. That's what accountability looks like." Karoline listened carefully, her expression neutral but attentive. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't rush. Instead, she paused briefly, gathering her thoughts before delivering a response that was both measured and devastatingly precise. "I agree wholeheartedly that accountability starts at the top," she said, her tone calm but firm. "But leadership isn't just about taking action, it's about taking the right action, and that requires careful consideration of the facts." She went on to outline specific examples where well-intentioned policies had failed because they weren't grounded in evidence. Each example was delivered with clarity, painting a picture of consequences that resonated deeply with the audience. "Leadership isn't just about making noise," Karoline continued, her voice softening slightly as she addressed the audience directly. "It's about creating lasting change, and you can't do that without understanding the full scope of the problem." The contrast between the two women was striking. While Jasmine relied on broad strokes and emotional appeals, Karoline drilled down into specifics, using data and real-world outcomes to bolster her points. The audience responded accordingly, leaning forward in their seats as Karoline spoke, clearly captivated by her ability to simplify complex ideas without oversimplifying them. Sensing that she needed to regain momentum, Jasmine tried to pivot back to her strengths. "You keep talking about facts and figures," she said, her tone sharpening as she sought to reclaim control. "But what about values? What about principles? Aren't those important too?" It was a clever attempt to reframe the conversation, appealing to the moral high ground while subtly implying that Karoline's approach was cold or detached. Karoline, however, wasn't fazed. She smiled faintly, as if expecting this line of attack. "Values and principles are absolutely essential," she replied, her voice warm but unwavering. "But they mean nothing if they aren't backed by action, and action means nothing if it doesn't lead to results." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. "At the end of the day, we're here to solve problems, not just talk about them. And solving problems requires both heart and mind." Her response drew murmurs of agreement from the audience, many of whom nodded approvingly. Even some of Jasmine's supporters seemed swayed, their earlier cheers giving way to thoughtful silence. Jasmine, realizing she was losing ground, attempted another interruption. "That's all fine and good," she interjected, her voice rising slightly. "But you still haven't answered my question. What happens when there's no clear solution? Do we just sit back and do nothing?" Karoline waited patiently until Jasmine finished, then responded with characteristic composure. "Doing nothing isn't the alternative to doing something," she said simply. "The alternative is doing the right thing, even if it takes time, even if it's hard." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze locking onto Jasmine's. "And sometimes the hardest part of leadership is admitting that you don't have all the answers." The room fell silent. Karoline's words carried weight, not just because of their content, but because of the way she delivered them, with quiet authority and undeniable conviction. Jasmine opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, visibly struggling to find a counter-argument. For the first time in the debate, she seemed genuinely stumped. Seizing the opportunity, Karoline posed a direct question to Jasmine, one that cut straight to the heart of the matter. "You've talked a lot tonight about taking bold action," she said, her tone polite but probing. "But can you point to a specific instance where a policy you support has achieved the results you claim it will?" She paused, letting the question hang in the air. "Because I'd love to hear it." The audience held its collective breath. This was a pivotal moment, a chance for Jasmine to prove that her arguments were more than just rhetoric. But instead of answering confidently, Jasmine faltered. She glanced at her notes, then looked up at Karoline, her expression clouded with uncertainty. She stammered, her voice trailing off. "Look, it's complicated. There are always variables." Her hesitation was palpable, and the audience reacted accordingly. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others exchanged knowing glances. It was clear that Jasmine had been caught off guard, unable to provide a concrete example to back up her claims. Karoline, sensing the moment, remained silent, her gaze steady and unyielding. She didn't press further. She didn't need to. The silence said everything. As the seconds ticked by, the tension in the room became almost unbearable. Finally, Jasmine broke eye contact, looking down at the desk in front of her. Her shoulders slumped ever so slightly, a subtle but telling sign of defeat. The audience, sensing the gravity of the moment, erupted into spontaneous applause, not for either debater specifically, but for the sheer drama of what had just unfolded. Even the moderator seemed momentarily at a loss for words. He cleared, his throat awkwardly, before stepping in to guide the conversation forward. "Thank you both for your insights," he said, his tone overly cheerful as he tried to diffuse the tension. Let's move on to our final topic. Behind the scenes, the production crew scrambled to adjust to the unexpected turn of events. Social media feeds lit up instantly, with viewers weighing in on the dramatic exchange. Clips of Jasmine's faltering response spread like wildfire, sparking heated discussions online. Supporters of both women debated fiercely, but one thing was undeniable. The balance of power had shifted decisively in Karoline's favor. For Jasmine, the realization that she had been bested must have been humbling. Known for her ability to command any room, she now found herself struggling to regain her footing. She attempted to rally during the final segment, throwing out passionate appeals and rhetorical flourishes, but the damage had been done. Her earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by a cautious defensiveness that undermined her arguments. Karoline, meanwhile, continued to shine. Her responses were as sharp and insightful as ever, delivered with a grace and humility that only added to her appeal. By the time the debate concluded, it was clear to everyone watching, including Jasmine herself, that Karoline had emerged victorious. Not through aggression or theatrics, but through sheer intellect, preparation, and poise. As the cameras cut to commercial, the audience erupted into sustained applause, their admiration for Karoline evident in every clap and cheer. Reporters swarmed backstage, eager to capture reactions from both women. Karoline handled the attention with characteristic modesty, deflecting praise onto the importance of open dialogue. Jasmine, on the other hand, avoided eye contact, retreating quietly as she processed the enormity of what had just happened. The showdown may have ended, but its impact would linger long after the credits rolled. As the debate wrapped up and the studio lights dimmed slightly, signaling the transition to closing statements, the atmosphere in the room was electric. The audience remained on edge, their eyes darting between Karoline Leavitt and Jasmine Crockett as they awaited the final exchanges of the night. Both women had been pushed to their limits, Karoline through her meticulous preparation and calm demeanor, and Jasmine through sheer force of will and emotional appeals. But it was clear that only one had emerged unscathed. The moderator turned first to Jasmine, inviting her to deliver her closing remarks. She hesitated for a moment, visibly collecting herself before leaning forward to address the audience. Her voice regained some of its earlier strength, though it lacked the fiery conviction that had defined her earlier performance. "Tonight has been about more than just debating policies," she began, her tone measured but tinged with frustration. "It's about standing up for what you believe in, even when others try to silence you." Her words carried an undercurrent of defensiveness, subtly implying that she had been unfairly targeted during the debate. Some members of the audience nodded sympathetically, while others exchanged skeptical glances. Jasmine continued, her delivery growing more impassioned as she pressed on. "We can't let fear or doubt stop us from fighting for change. Progress isn't easy. It never has been. But I refuse to back down, no matter how hard they push." Her statement drew polite applause, though it felt muted compared to the roaring ovations she might have received earlier in the evening. It was evident that her attempts to reframe the narrative hadn't fully resonated. The awkward silences and stumbles from earlier still lingered in people's minds. As she finished speaking, she sat back in her chair, exhaling deeply, as if relieved to have made it through the ordeal. When it was Karoline's turn, the contrast couldn't have been starker. She adjusted her posture slightly, sitting tall but relaxed, her hands resting lightly on the desk. Her expression was calm, almost serene as she looked directly into the camera. "This discussion tonight wasn't about winning or losing," she began, her voice soft yet commanding. "It was about having honest conversations about issues that affect all of us, issues that demand our attention, our empathy, and our commitment to finding solutions." She paused, allowing her words to settle over the audience before continuing. "Passion is important, values are important, but so is evidence, so is listening. Not just to those who agree with us, but to those who challenge us. Because real progress happens when we combine heart and mind, principle and practice." Her tone grew warmer, more personal, as she addressed the viewers at home. "None of us has all the answers, but together we can work toward a future where everyone feels heard, seen, and valued." The audience erupted into applause, this time louder and more sustained than ever before. Many rose to their feet, clapping enthusiastically as Karoline concluded her remarks with a small, grateful smile. Even some of Jasmine's supporters seemed moved by the sincerity and clarity of Karoline's message. For a brief moment, the room felt united, not divided by ideology but connected by a shared desire for meaningful dialogue. Backstage, reporters swarmed both women as soon as the cameras stopped rolling. Karoline handled the attention with characteristic humility, deflecting praise onto the importance of open discussions and respectful disagreement. When asked about her thoughts on Jasmine's performance, she responded diplomatically. Jasmine brings passion and energy to these conversations, which is incredibly valuable, she said. I respect her willingness to engage, even when it's difficult. That's something we should all strive for. Jasmine, meanwhile, avoided direct questions about the debate itself, instead focusing on broader themes of resilience and determination. I'll always speak my truth no matter what, she told one reporter, her voice steady but lacking its usual bravado. If people take issue with that, so be it. I'm not here to please everyone. I'm here to make a difference. Despite her outward confidence, however, there were subtle signs that the evening had taken a toll on her. She avoided eye contact with Karoline as they passed each other backstage, her usual boldness replaced by a quiet introspection. Members of her team hovered nearby, offering words of encouragement, but it was clear that she was processing the weight of what had just happened. Social media feeds exploded with reactions as clips of the debate continued to circulate online. Viewers debated every moment, dissecting everything from Jasmine's rhetorical flourishes to Karoline's razor-sharp rebuttals. Some praised Jasmine for her courage and passion, while others lauded Karoline for her intellect and composure. Memes and GIFs capturing key moments, from Karoline's calm interruptions to Jasmine's stunned silence, spread rapidly across platforms, cementing the event as a cultural touchstone. For Karoline, the aftermath brought a wave of opportunities. Book deals, speaking engagements, and interview requests poured in almost immediately, eager to capitalize on her newfound prominence. Journalists hailed her as a rising star in public discourse, praising her ability to bridge divides without compromising her principles. Meanwhile, commentators marveled at how she had managed to remain composed under pressure, turning potential conflict into constructive conversation. Jasmine faced a different kind of scrutiny. Critics questioned whether her reliance on emotion and rhetoric came at the expense of substance, pointing to her inability to provide concrete examples during the debate. Supporters rallied around her, defending her passion and accusing Karoline of being overly clinical. Yet even among her allies, there was a sense that the evening had exposed vulnerabilities in her approach, vulnerabilities she would need to address if she hoped to maintain her influence. Days after the debate, the ripple effects continued to unfold. News outlets analyzed the showdown from every angle, debating its implications for political discourse and media representation. Political analysts weighed in on what the event revealed about the shifting dynamics of public debate. The tension between emotion and logic, charisma and credibility, conviction and compromise. Educators used clips from the program to teach students about effective communication and critical thinking. For many viewers, the debate became a case study in contrasting styles of leadership and advocacy. Karoline's methodical approach highlighted the importance of preparation, evidence, and emotional intelligence, while Jasmine's fiery rhetoric underscored the power of passion and authenticity. Neither approach was inherently superior. They simply appealed to different aspects of human nature. Together, they demonstrated the complexity of navigating contentious issues in a polarized world. In quieter moments, both women reflected on the experience privately. For Karoline, it reinforced her belief in the value of staying grounded and focused, even in high-pressure situations. She knew that debates like this one weren't just about showcasing knowledge. They were about fostering understanding and building bridges. For Jasmine, the evening served as a wake-up call, forcing her to confront areas where she could improve. While she remained steadfast in her convictions, she also recognized the need to balance passion with precision, emotion with evidence. Ultimately, the debate transcended its immediate context, becoming part of a larger conversation about how we engage with one another in times of division. Whether viewed as a triumph of intellect over emotion or a reminder of the importance of balance, the showdown between Karoline Leavitt and Jasmine Crockett left an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it. And as the dust settled, one thing was certain: the world would be watching closely to see what each woman did next. In the weeks and months following the debate, the ripple effects of that unforgettable evening continued to shape both Karoline Leavitt's and Jasmine Crockett's careers, and the broader landscape of public discourse. The showdown had become more than just a clash of personalities. It was now a defining moment in how people thought about leadership, communication, and the delicate balance between passion and precision. For Karoline, life changed almost overnight. What had started as a single appearance on a popular debate show quickly snowballed into a whirlwind of opportunities. Invitations poured in from universities, think tanks, and conferences eager to hear her insights. Her calm, measured approach resonated deeply with audiences who craved thoughtful analysis amid the noise of modern media. Book publishers clamored to sign her for a memoir or manifesto, seeing her as the voice of reason in an increasingly chaotic world. Even late-night talk shows extended invitations hoping to tap into her growing fan base. But what set Karoline apart wasn't just her newfound fame, it was how she handled it. Despite the sudden spotlight, she remained grounded, consistently, redirecting praise toward the importance of open dialogue and mutual respect. In interviews, she emphasized that debates like the one with Jasmine weren't about winning, but about fostering understanding. "We don't have to agree on everything," she often said, "but we do need to listen to each other. That's where progress begins." Her humility endeared her to many, earning her a reputation as someone who led not just with intellect, but with integrity. She leveraged her platform wisely, using it to advocate for policies rooted in evidence and empathy. Whether speaking at a town hall meeting or testifying before lawmakers, she maintained the same composure and clarity that had captivated millions during the debate. Her rise felt inevitable, yet refreshingly authentic, a testament to the power of preparation, patience, and purpose. Jasmine's journey, however, took a different path. While she initially faced criticism for her performance, she refused to let the setback define her. Known for her resilience, she channeled the experience into self-reflection, reevaluating her approach to public discourse. Behind closed doors, she admitted to colleagues that the debate had exposed blind spots in her strategy, areas where her reliance on emotion sometimes overshadowed substance. Rather than retreat, she embraced the challenge, vowing to sharpen her arguments and deepen her knowledge. Publicly, Jasmine framed the debate as a learning moment, not just for herself but for others. During appearances on news programs and podcasts, she acknowledged the importance of balancing passion with evidence. "You can't just speak from the heart," she told one interviewer. "You have to back it up with facts." "I learned that the hard way, but I'm grateful for the lesson." Her candor won over some skeptics, though others remained unconvinced. Still, there was no denying her determination to grow stronger from the experience. The contrast between the two women became a frequent topic of discussion in media circles. Analysts dissected their styles, debating whether emotional appeals or logical reasoning carried more weight in shaping public opinion. Some argued that Karoline's success represented a shift toward rationality in political debates, while others believed Jasmine's fiery passion still held immense value in inspiring action. Ultimately, most agreed that both approaches had merit, but only when used effectively. Social media played a significant role in amplifying the legacy of the debate. Clips of key moments continued to circulate long after the event itself, sparking new conversations with each viewing. Memes capturing Karoline's poised rebuttals, "I'm still speaking," became cultural touchstones, symbolizing the quiet authority that resonated so powerfully with viewers. Meanwhile, hashtags praising Jasmine's courage and conviction kept her relevant, ensuring that her voice remained part of the national conversation. Educators also seized on the moment, incorporating the debate into curricula to teach students about effective communication and critical thinking. Teachers praised Karoline's use of data and logic as a model for constructing persuasive arguments, while acknowledging Jasmine's ability to connect emotionally with audiences. Together, the two debaters offered a masterclass in contrasting styles, each valuable in its own right, depending on context and audience. As time passed, the impact of the debate extended beyond individual reputations, influencing how debates themselves were conducted. Producers of similar programs began emphasizing the importance of balance, ensuring that participants had equal opportunities to present their views without constant interruptions. Viewers demanded higher standards, rewarding those who prioritized substance over spectacle. The showdown served as a reminder that even in heated discussions, civility and clarity could prevail. Years later, when historians looked back on this period, they cited the debate as a turning point in public discourse. It marked a shift away from shouting matches and toward meaningful exchanges, conversations that challenged assumptions without resorting to personal attacks. Both Karoline and Jasmine came to be seen as pivotal figures in this evolution, their strengths and weaknesses offering lessons for future generations. For Karoline, the debate solidified her status as a trusted voice in journalism and advocacy. She went on to write best-selling books, host her own podcast, and advise policymakers on bridging divides through respectful dialogue. Her name became synonymous with poise under pressure, a quality that inspired countless young professionals entering fields ranging from politics to education. Jasmine, meanwhile, reinvented herself, emerging stronger and more strategic than ever before. She adapted her style, blending her natural charisma with deeper research and analysis. Though her transformation took time, she eventually regained her footing, proving once again that resilience is one of the most powerful traits a person can possess. By the end of her career, she was remembered not just for her fiery rhetoric, but for her willingness to evolve, a trait that earned her enduring respect. Decades later, clips of the debate were still shown in classrooms and training seminars, serving as a timeless example of how to navigate disagreement with grace and grit. For those who lived through it, the showdown between Karoline Leavitt and Jasmine Crockett remained etched in memory, a moment when two vastly different voices came together to remind us all of the power of conversation. And though their paths diverged after that fateful night, their shared legacy endured, a testament to the enduring importance of listening, learning, and leading with purpose.